$34,600,000 for the Consolidated Fuel Overhaul, Repair, and Test Facility at the Tinker Air Force Base. $8,740,000 for the Denison Dam, Lake Texoma. $86,817,625 in requested spending by Representative Tom Cole and the Carl Albert Center. What do these all have in common? They're all earmarks. They were all line items in bills in one way or another. The first three were much more contemporary, or over sort of for Representative Cole over for a longer period of time. The Carl Albert Center was an earmark, I think in 1978. The original funding for the center was written into a bill. So what do we think about earmarks? Some view earmarks as sort of the epitome of the culture of corruption, right? So this is what makes Congress so terrible, are these line items in the bills that are towards these directed projects. Others, members of Congress, tend to view these as congressionally directed spending. Some, when they're feeling really excited, will call earmarks constitutionally directed spending. So many members see nothing wrong with earmarks. The public, for the most part, sees earmarks as, I think, something that's bad, and that sort of epitomizes what Congress is doing wrong. Others, there's a few scholars, probably myself, disagree. I think earmarks aren't all that terrible. So I'll mention something about the Constitution. So what does the Constitution say about earmarks? It's surprisingly vague, right? You're not going to find the word earmark written into the Constitution. What does it say about appropriation spending? So this is generally earmarks are written into appropriations bills. Again, the Constitution is fairly vague about appropriations spending. If you look at the origination clause, this is Article 1, Section 7, it states that all revenue-raising bills must begin in the House. So these are tax bills. So that's not really spending. I find it's a common misconception that spending bills also have to start in the House, so the lower chamber, closer to the people. Turns out this is not true. Most people believe it, but it's not. Spending bills can start in either chamber. Even if they had to start in the House, the Senate has some procedural, I don't want to use tricks, sleights of hand. They have ways that they can start spending bills in the Senate. Generally, you just take some bill that the House passed, a tax bill, strip out all the language, put your language in, pass it, and ship it over to the House. If I have my story right, I think the Affordable Care Act was actually passed in this way. So people argue against the Affordable Care Act, say it's unconstitutional because it started in the Senate. Technically, that's not correct. So I hesitate to call that a trick. Maybe we'll call it a feature, depending on how you want to look at that. It's in the rules, right? All right, so the text of the Constitution is vague about earmarks and appropriations. So we can turn to some of the founders, right? What did the founders say? What did they think about earmarks or appropriation spending? And they, of course, disagree, right? I always tell my students, if someone tells you the founder said, they usually mean a founder said, or they're lying, one or the other. So let's look at some of the founders. James Madison, right? He was present at the writing of the Constitution. He should have a pretty good handle on what the Constitution says about this. And Thomas Jefferson, they would argue, I think, against earmarks. They would say the only spending that the Congress can do is on those items that are listed in the enumerated power. So Article 1, Section 8 is a list of things that Congress can spend money on, and they would say only the enumerated powers. In fact, they've said so. So wars are okay. Post roads are okay, postal roads. The Carl Albert Center, probably not okay. So it's a good thing Madison is not here, and Jefferson started UVA and not the University of Oklahoma. We can turn to another founder, Alexander Hamilton, also present at the Constitutional Convention. Hamilton was in favor of a much larger federal government. He disagreed. He read a little further down in Article 1, Section 8, and there's the general welfare clause. So he would argue any spending that would support the general welfare is okay. And so at the time of the founding and a little while afterwards, this was usually over what's called internal improvements, so a series of roads and canals. Many of the early presidential candidates, Henry Clay, others, had plans for internal improvements, and they sort of would run on this platform. Even John Calhoun, we think of as John Calhoun is the states' rights person. He was actually in favor of the American system, which was a series of roads and canals. Yeah, so later on he switched, figured out that wasn't going to work for him politically, and became a very strong proponent of states' rights. So Hamilton, probably in favor of earmarks. James Monroe, a little while longer, he wanted a strict interpretation of the general welfare clause. So spending was okay, but it had to be for the general welfare, not a specific welfare. So he'd probably be against earmarks. So he vetoed a bill funding the Cumberland Road, that's sort of a famous road, saying it was a local benefit. So he argued funding for a lighthouse is okay, right? Because everyone can use that for commerce, right? Anyone moving up and down the coast. Funding to, say, dredge the port of Savannah, that would be not okay because it would benefit Savannah in the state of Georgia. As an aside, Congress just appropriated $134 million to dredge the port of Savannah. Times have changed, and the conservative, Republicans from Georgia argued, for a long time to get that money. The Constitution is vague on this, and different founders and different politicians would interpret it differently, generally as they see fit. Okay, so let's jump ahead, the contemporary Congress. So what has happened to earmarks? Starting in the 1990s, we began to see a massive increase in earmarks. So this is both in numbers of projects and dollars amounts. So it continued through the Republican Revolution, right? Republicans came in, we're going to cut the size of government. Earmarks continued to go up, continued through the Bush presidency. And the Democrats did this as well. So this clearly was not a Democratic thing or a Republican thing. It was a politician thing, right? You get money, you send it back to your district, and the story goes, it helps you to get reelected. So hundreds of thousands of earmarks worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So the spending reached a peak in 2006 at $30 billion in 1 year. The public started to get upset about this, and starting in 2011, when the Republicans regained control of Congress, they instituted an earmark ban. So they said no more earmarks. Leading up to this, they changed the rules a little bit that said a member had to attach their name to any earmarked projects. Members pretended to fight this, but it turns out they're not against it, right? Because they can say, look, there's my name. It's right next to the line in the bill. I got that bridge for you, or I got that intersection for you. So they weren't against this, putting their name on the project. So how does the process work? We think these earmarks are added at some smoke-filled back room, right, where the members get together and they bribe each other and whatever. It's not really how it works. Like any good government project, there's a routine. It's a highly routinized process. So for the most part, the people who control the spending are the chairs or cardinals of the appropriations subcommittees, and then the ranking members. So the cardinals are the majority party, the ranking members are the minority party members. So there's 12 appropriations subcommittees, each with the bill, and the chairs or the cardinals and ranking members control the earmarks. So I've talked to some staffers, and they say this is the case. It's not the case of Boehner or whoever is the speaker, has a giant pot of money and doles it out. It's these individual members who chair, or the ranking members on the committees. And this makes them powerful. They're powerful within the institution. So part of the reason this ban went in for the earmarks was to pull power away from the Appropriations Committee, and it vests it back in the Speaker's office. And so, Boehner liked to say, look, earmarks are bad, and I'm putting this ban in, but it also benefited him as Speaker. So how does the process work? Each of the 12 committees is supposed to pass a bill each year. That's the spending bill on their sort of area of jurisdiction. Congress has not been very good at this. I think it's been a while since they passed all 12 bills between both chambers. So the normal practice is you take 1% of the total spending for that bill and designate it for earmarks for member projects. So this general agreed upon amount. So you have large bills, for example, defense appropriations. There's a lot of spending in that bill. That means there's a lot of money for earmarks. There's other bills, financial services, a very small bill, very small dollar amounts for earmarks. Oddly enough, financial services spends money on presidential libraries. I don't know why, but I've done a lot of research on earmarks, and they're all just geared towards presidential libraries, not towards other things. So they take this 1%, and generally there's a split, 60% for the majority party, 40% for the minority party. If you look at each of the bills, it lines up almost exactly. So I don't think it's happenstance. I think they plan that out ahead of time. And generally speaking, the one party does not interfere with the other on how they dole out their earmarks. Democrats spend how they want, Republicans how they want, and they're not going to bother to sort of go back and forth and say, don't spend money on that guy's bill and the other party. It's just too much work to do. So like any good government project, when a member wants an earmark, what do? They fill out a form. There's literally forms for these. I worked in an office. I worked for Representative Dan Lipinski, and you get the form, and what do you want, how much money, where's it going to be spent, what's the benefit, and so on and so forth. There's a day when everything is due. It's a crazy day on the Hill. There's staffers running all over the place trying to find the right office. Like any good government process, there's someone there making sure you fill out the form correctly, made sure you didn't staple but paper clipped, and the paper clip is on the left and not on the right, and you didn't put it in a folder. It's a fun day. At the end of the day is also kind of fun once that is all over. All right, so who gets earmarks? We like to think people get earmarks when they're needed projects for the district. Nah, not really. So who gets most of the earmarks? It's the chair of the Full Appropriations Committee and the ranking member of the Full Appropriations Committee. So the most powerful people who control the pots of money, they take the cut first, and they take a big cut. Jerry Lewis, who used to be chair of the Appropriations Committee for the Republicans, he would take a very large cut. David Obey, when he was chair, would also take a big cut. Next in line are the chairs and ranking members of the subcommittees. They take a big cut. Finally, the people on appropriations, they take a slightly smaller cut, and any money that's left over goes to all the rest of the members in Congress. So having a seat at the table, you get a bigger piece of the pie. You're not at the table, you're going to get a smaller amount. So about 35% goes to the Appropriations Committee members, and the rest goes to everyone else. If you went equal share, they should only get about 10%. So are earmarks used as a tool to get votes and bribe members? Not really, right? Occasionally, sure. We can find stories where I think that's true. I think Medicare Part D, Joanne Emerson was the deciding vote on that. A couple years later after the deciding vote, I read in the paper she gets a couple $100 million for a project. Can you draw the line between that? I don't know. But this isn't the normal course of events. If members were constantly trading votes for earmarks and voting against their district, they would get voted out of office. So it's not a good long-term strategy. Does it happen occasionally? Sure, right? And we can point to instances. But I don't think it's the driving force behind this. So who benefits from earmarks? Generally, Democrats benefit much more than Republicans. And this is another reason why the Republicans put in the ban. So some of my research shows Democrats get a return electorally to bringing money back to the district, and lots of Republicans don't, especially very conservative Republicans. And so again, this is a reason why they were in favor of the ban. Now Republicans benefit from things like tax cuts, if you can target a tax cut, but those aren't traditional earmarks. So real quickly, are there drawbacks to earmarks? One is they add to the deficit. Sort of, right? So the Budget Committee set the overall spending levels. Then they take a chunk of that, 1%, and put it towards earmarks. So you could say, well, we'll take that 1% and not spend it at all, and you could decrease the deficit. But it's not extra money that they're spending. Is the money wasted? You decide, right? That money for the Tinker Air Force Base, what does that give? That gives jobs for Oklahoma, right? Jobs that would normally go elsewhere for both the military and civilians. So I would argue that's great money. It's well spent. If that money went to an Air Force base in Texas, that was a waste. right? And members will tell you this. Look, any money spent in my district is important. Any money that's spent elsewhere is a waste. So, should we bring the earmarks back? Yes and no. So I think some of the money is important, right? It goes towards projects, and members know very well how money should be spent in their districts, right? Now, would you agree members know how money should be spent in other districts? That's for you to decide. If members aren't deciding how the money is spent, that usually means the president and the executive branch is deciding how the money is spent. And so someone's making the decision. And should it be members or should it be the executive branch? I think that's a question we'll have to leave till later. So I'm going to stop there and open the floor for questions.
Freedom 101 is made possible by generous support from the University of Oklahoma Alumni Association. Freedom 101 is a program of the Institute for the American Constitutional Heritage at the University of Oklahoma. For more videos and podcasts, visit freedom.ou.edu.